Okay, so last time, I'm going to do a pretty extensive review because I know a lot of folks weren't here last time. But last time we started talking about the period now where Israel and Judah have become two separate countries. And you've got the map. Become two separate nations with two separate kings. We went through the early kings of each of the two separated kingdoms. And we saw how in Israel in particular we're already on our fourth dynasty. Not our fourth king, our fourth dynasty. Because the kings very quickly went off the rails in Israel. In Judah, of course, we're still dealing with the same dynasty. We're still dealing with descendants of David. But other than the king who's king currently where we're at, Asa, there haven't been any really good kings there either. But God's been sort of bearing with them because of the promises he made to David about his descendants. Okay, and in Israel, after going through the first three dynasties relatively quickly, and the three dynasties went through themselves fairly quickly. We had the one guy who ruled for a grand total of 7 days, and was the third dynasty. We've seen, after we through those quickly, we slowed down a little bit after this guy Omri. Now Omri himself, there wasn't that much about here in the scriptures. We talked last time about how archaeologically and geopolitically, Omri is by far the most important king, not just of the northern kingdom of Israel, but of any kingdom of any king we've talked about. In terms of the archaeological records, in terms of what we hear from the surrounding nations. In fact, we talked about how for several centuries after he lived, all the countries around Israel referred to the northern kingdom of Israel as Beit Omri, the house of Omri. Okay, because he had such a reputation, and he developed all of these political alliances. He developed the military. He ruled over the largest, after Solomon, the physically largest territory. And we have tribute stones to him from other nations paying tribute. There's a famous one called the Black Stele in the British Museum that you can go see today if you're ever in London. But in Scripture, we have the fact that he was evil, how long he reigned, the fact that he bought the hill of Shemer and built what became the capital of the northern kingdom, Samaria, on it. And that's it. Because that's all God has to say about it, basically.
Not much.
Is that he was evil. He lived, he died. Right? And because it's relevant to the story, he founded the city of Samaria, because we're about to read about a bunch of stuff happening in this city. So, that's it. His son is Ahab. Okay, who's a more well-known biblically king, although we've already started to see, and we're going to see further, that most of this section of Scripture that is quote-unquote about Ahab isn't really about Ahab. It's about Elijah, who happened to be a prophet during the reign of Ahab. But Ahab, one of Omri's great strategic alliances was he married off his firstborn son and heir Ahab to Jezebel, who was the daughter of the king of Tyre. And Jezebel's name, if it's not immediately apparent, the bell at the end of Jezebel, it's actually her name was Yitzbaal. She's named after Baal. Okay. And we talked about how previously Israel, their first king in the northern kingdom, Jeroboam son of Nebat, had said, well, I can't have people taking religious pilgrimages down to Jerusalem because if they keep going down there, they might decide to stay. Right? So he said, I need to keep the religion local. And so he set up his golden calves at Bethel and Dan, at the southern and northern end of his kingdom. And he set up his own festivals, and he sort of created his own Yahweh religion for everybody to practice. Now that was, as it were, bad enough. But when we get to Ahab, last time we read about how Ahab, as a sort of wedding present, in this new capital city of Samaria, after he built his palace there, built a nice big temple to Baal for his wife. Okay? So now Samaria, as the capital of the northern kingdom, sort of parallel to Jerusalem, has a nice big palace adjoined by a nice big temple, except in Samaria it's Baal. Okay, so instead of now worshiping Yahweh the wrong way, they just gave up on that altogether, and they moved on to just straight up Baal worship, to worshiping the Phoenician gods. Okay? And we're also going to, it hasn't been said in the text yet, but we're going to find out that Jezebel, one of the first things she did was go out and have all the prophets of Yahweh murdered that she could find. Okay? To get rid of them. Okay, so this isn't just like Solomon building temples to accommodate his wives and sort of be tolerant of their religions. This is Ahab's wife, through Ahab, is conducting this campaign to forcibly convert the entire country to the worship of Baal. Okay. Now when we talk about the worship of Baal, and we're going to see it in the plural tonight when we start going, Elijah's going to talk about them worshiping the Baals. Okay. That's because the word Baal or Baal means Lord or Master in Phoenician. Okay. So they referred to all of their gods collectively as the Baals or the Baals, the Lords. Right? And this stands in contrast, of course, to Yahweh, who says he is the Lord, singular, right? And there are no others. They have their lords. When it's used in the singular, the god that most people think they're referring to is Hadad, who is a storm god. And we've seen that name come up before because there have been people named after him. He was the most commonly worshipped Phoenician god through this area, and he is of no relation, as far as I know, to the Hadads. So,
I was about to say, it's a heck of a legacy about that.
So the Baal over time is a storm god. Now, we just barely met last time. We barely met Elijah. Okay, Elijah, his name Eliyah, means my God is Yahweh. So already his name is sort of sticking it to Ahab and Jezebel, right? He's sort of showing up and saying, "Oh yeah, well, my God is Yahweh." Tough beat. And when we first meet him, he wandered in front of Ahab, and it's cleaned up a little in most English translations, but in the original Hebrew especially, he speaks this horrible pidgin Hebrew, which is sort of really bad. And so he sort of came in and said the equivalent of, "Ain't gonna rain no more unless I say so." And then he turned around and he left. Okay? So he comes in front of Ahab, gives this pronouncement, and just leaves. And he goes and hides out in a ravine. Okay? And we read in the ravine, he was fed by ravens. And we talked briefly about, just because it shows up on History Channel specials, and this is one of my favorites. The word for raven in Aramaic is very similar to the word for Arab. And so there are people who try, because it's silly to have birds bringing people food, right? So they say that it was Arabs who brought him food in the ravine. Which to me begs the question then, where did these magical Arabs come from? Who just happened to know Elijah was in the ravine. And came and brought him food for months.
So which is harder to right? Magical
They were
Arabs
part
or
of
ravens?
Jezebel's army, and they switched to the other side.
Well, no, the Arabs had nothing to do with the Phoenicians. They're nomads. They're out in the desert.
They're out in the desert.
But as depicted in the stained glass window of Elijah, or Saint Elias. Because remember, his name is Eliah. If you try and put that into Greek, the Greeks like to end their names with a sigma. Right, with an S, so it becomes Elias. Which is where we get Saint Elias. He's being fed by ravens in the stained glass window.
Are ravens a symbol of death during that?
Well, ravens are unclean carrion birds, which I was going to point out, because what happens is while he's in the ravine, right now he said it's not going to rain anymore, and it doesn't rain. Well, eventually the little brook in this ravine dries up because there hasn't been any rain. Right? And so he went to Zarephath, and that's way up. If you look on the map, way up north there, between Sidon and Tyre, which puts it smack in the middle of what?
Lebanon.
Phoenicia.
Most Phoenicia.
Smack in the middle of Jezebel's home area. Okay, that's where God tells him to go. Okay? And he goes up there to stay with this widow. Okay? And this widow says, God, Yahweh sent me up here to stay with you, get me something to eat. And the widow says, I don't have anything to eat. I've got enough to make maybe one little cake. I'm going to make it for me and my son. We're going to eat it, and then we're going to starve to death. Right? Because, of course, with a drought, you have a famine. And so Elijah tells her, well, don't worry about it. So make me some food. Make some food for yourself and your son. And you'll see. And miraculously, her little bottle of oil with a few drops at the bottom never runs out of oil. And she never runs out of flour. And she has enough food. Then while he stayed with her, her son dies. Right? And she comes to him and says, well, now my son has died. I'm bereft. And she says, surely this is a punishment for my sins. and Elijah goes and raises her son from the dead. Okay. But the point that's being made here is, we've got Israel that's quickly turning into Phoenicia. Right? Everybody there is worshiping Baal. They're killing the prophets. They don't believe. Meanwhile, up here in the middle of Phoenicia, there's this widow woman who, first of all, has enough faith in Yahweh that when Elijah tells her to go start cooking, she does it. And who then is repentant. That reflects repentance. The two things that are completely missing in Israel. Okay? So the same thing. Jezebel's out. Jezebel, who's the queen of Israel, is out killing prophets. Meanwhile, these unclean birds are bringing the prophet food. Right? Just like the unclean Gentile up here who's
bringing food.
Who's taking care of it. And we mentioned last time that Jesus refers to this. Right? Jesus says, at the time of Elijah, were there no widows in Israel? Right? And the question that he's implying is, were there any widows with faith in Israel? Because the people he's talking to are a lot like the people of Israel at this time. They don't really believe. Okay. So we got that contrast. So that brings us up to chapter 18 where we're starting tonight. Okay. So chapter 18 verse 1, after a long time in the third year. So it's been 3 years since he showed up in front of Ahab and said, ain't gonna rain no more. And it left. So 3 years of no rain. 0 rain in this whole area. So you can imagine the level of drought and famine. The word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now, think about this for a second. Have you noticed that Elijah, he gets told, God says to him, rise, go into the Kerith ravine. He goes, okay. goes and sits in a ravine and gets fed by birds. Drinks the water. The water dries up. God says to him, go to the middle of Phoenicia, the hometown of your worst enemy. He gets up and says, okay. Right? He goes up there. Now he's staying with her. He's safe up here. He says, go back and show up in Israel in front of Ahab who's trying to kill you. Okay. There's a contrast here being made between Elijah and the Israelites. Remember the Israelites in the desert?
Yeah.
What happened when their water ran out? Oh, you brought us out here to die. Why? Right? You know? Elijah just prays and God says, well, go over here. And he says, okay. So there's Elijah here is sort of our textbook example of obedience. Right? As opposed to the disobedience of the rest of Israel at this time. Verse 2, so Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Now Obadiah's name, you might see the Yah at the end, is from Eved Yah, which means servant of Yahweh. Okay? So his we're going to see he lives up to that, at least sort of, but you wonder how he's getting along so well with Ahab's court. But Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. And this is during the famine. So this is at no small expense and no small risk to himself. Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we will not have to kill any of our animals. So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another.
He didn't mention human beings.
No, he's concerned about his horses. He's concerned about his horses and mules. Well, and that's because the horses, of course, are for military purposes, right? And the mules are for shipping purposes. So he's worried about his kingdom, the kingdom his father built up and now he inherited falling apart. So Ahab goes in one direction, Obadiah goes in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, is it really you, my lord Elijah? Yes, he replied, go tell your master Elijah is here. What have I done wrong, asked Obadiah, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? Right, so he sees Elijah, he says, Elijah, great to see you. Elijah says, yeah, go tell Ahab I'm here. And Obadiah's like, what did I do to you that you want me to go tell him that and get me killed? Are you crazy? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. He will kill me. So, basically Obadiah is saying, I know how this works. He says, I go and tell Ahab you're here. He comes out here to kill you. The Spirit of God whisks you away somewhere so you're protected. And I'm standing here holding the bag. So he says, I'm not doing this. Right? I'm not. I said, haven't you heard? I protected all these prophets. Come on, cut me a little slack. I'm trying to be a good guy here. Elijah said, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. So Elijah says, I swear I'm going to be here when you get back with Ahab. I'm not going anywhere. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. We saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" So now look at the interpretation here. From Ahab's perspective, it's Elijah who's causing problems. Everything was going great. And then this Elijah guy shows up and stops it from raining. Everything was wonderful. Verse 18, "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." These 400 prophets of Asherah, I think the Orthodox Study Bible has 400 prophets of the groves.
Yeah, sacred groves, yeah.
The groves that they're referring to, that's the Greek translation. They're trying to hide the Asherah poles that we've talked about in the past. Yeah, these giant wooden and stone phallic symbols. So this second group of 400 who eat at Jezebel's table, these are ritual prostitutes. These are female temple prostitutes who worship Asherah. Those are the 450. And the Greek has prophets of shame.
Yes.
Now this, we're going to go back a little here. We've talked about before how these books pass through a bunch of editors. These were put together from separate stories. Okay. One of the things the Hebrew editors did was, and this is how they described, the rabbis described it in terms of the old story with Noah after the flood, after he got drunk and his good sons went and covered his nakedness. They described it as covering the nakedness of some of their forefathers. Okay. The Hebrew word for shame is bosheth. Bosheth. So here the 450 prophets of Baal are called the 450 prophets of Bosheth. Where have we heard Bosheth before? It's in a whole bunch of names.
What is it? Bosheth?
Back in 1 Kingdoms, Bosheth. In English. Whole bunch of names from Saul's family. Remember his first son was Ishbosheth. Jonathan's son was Mephibosheth. And now it doesn't make any sense that they would be named, son of my shame. That's because one of the things the editors did is they went back and they replaced the word Baal with the word Bosheth in big chunks of these books. So instead of them being prophets of Baal, here they're prophets of Bosheth. So the reality is Saul's firstborn son was named Ishbaal. And they covered it up. And Mephibosheth's real name was Mephibaal. And they covered up with this. And they considered, the scribes doing this, they considered this to be doing a good thing. Right? To be not pointing out the wickedness
Cover-ups.
of their forefathers. But it is a slight cover-up. Okay? So we saw really in Judges that this paganism coming into the Israelite religion goes all the way back. Almost right off the bat, they started worshiping. So this shows he was even in Saul. Solomon wasn't the first one to start going down that road. Okay, but so now Elijah has said to Ahab, right? Ahab says, "Well, there you are, you troublemaker." He says, "I'm not one causing trouble. You causing trouble." Right? With your wickedness. And he says, "I want you to get all your people, all your prophets of Baal, all your prophets of Asherah, meet me on top of Mount Carmel." Okay, so he calls out everybody. Okay? He calls out everybody. Against the one, just him. Just him. Verse 20, so Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Okay? So Ahab does it. He gets everybody together on this mountain. Now, you have to remember is they're all standing now on this mountain. 850 pagan prophets. Ahab, the king, whose wife has been sending his army out to kill prophets of the Lord. Okay? Huge crowd of observers, of Israelites, on one side. And over on the other side, this guy who's been living in a ravine. Right? Elijah, standing there. Okay? This is the scene. And Elijah asked for this. This is what he has set up. Okay? So he looks at the people. He goes straight to the people in verse 21. How long will you hover between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. This is just some down home. He says, look, you guys need to decide. Right? The image is, the word that's translated hover there is of a bird about to land. Right? You guys need to land one spot or the other. Okay? If Yahweh is God, you need to worship him. Get rid of all this Baal nonsense, all this Asherah nonsense. Has to be gone. If Baal's God, fine. Right? Then worship him. But you can't have it both ways. Okay? You can't have it both ways. And the people said nothing. So they're not ready to commit. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Right? So he's doing a little odds making. Right? He says,
And he's covering up with the ones that are hiding.
well, yeah. He says there's one of me over here, there's 450 of them over there. Okay? Get 2 bulls for us. Let them choose one for themselves. Okay, so get 2 bulls, let them pick which one they want. Let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, I'll call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he's God. Okay, so he sets up the rules. Get 2 bulls, you pick the one you want, we each build an altar. Set the meat out, butcher it, set the meat out on the wood. I'll set the meat out on the wood over here. We'll both call on our gods. The one who lights the sacrifice on fire, right, that's the one who's really God. Okay? Seems fair. Then all the people said, what you say is good. So all the observers are like, all right. Showdown. It's early reality television, right? So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. O Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. Okay, so morning here is actually from the first hour. So from 7 a.m. to noon, for 5 hours, they're out there praying, dancing, chanting, right? Singing their Baal hymns. All 450 of them run around. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. So verse 27, at noon Elijah began to taunt them. So at noon the smack talk starts.
Trash.
So Elijah says, shout louder. He says, surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought. And deep in thought is kind of covering something up there. What he actually says in Hebrew, again, this being Elijah, is maybe he's on the toilet. Right? Maybe he's busy. Right? And if you give him a minute, right, he'll come and he'll set it on fire. So maybe he's deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and you need to wake him up. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears as was their custom until their blood flowed. Okay, so now they're really getting down to business. Right? They're screaming and wailing and slashing themselves and and dancing harder. Still nothing's happened. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. So another 6 hours of this. Nothing happening. There was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Verse 30, then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord which was in ruins. So there was an old altar to Yahweh there, which was in ruins because, of course, Jezebel had gone around knocking them all down. So he repaired the altar of the Lord which was in ruins. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it, large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. That's about 13 quarts. See, so he digs a ditch around the altar after he's built it up. Okay. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Now this is enough. We've already seen the smack talk. Now we're going to get a little showmanship. So then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Okay, so he says, go and get 4 jars of water. We're going to dump that, get the wood all wet. Okay, make it harder to light. So they go and do it. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it a 3rd time. And the water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. Okay, so this whole altar is now soaking wet. Okay. At the time of sacrifice, now note, Elijah's doing this at the time that God commanded the evening sacrifice be made in the law. And remember, he built the altar with the 12 stones exactly the way Moses did. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know you, O Lord, our God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Okay. Notice that last line. What kind of God is he? He's not a storm God. He's the kind of God who wants to turn his people's hearts back to him. Okay?
I can see Charlton Heston playing this role. Yeah.
So,
Lord God of Abraham.
well, and that's longer in English than it is in Hebrew. In Hebrew, that's a little 2-line prayer.
Oh, really?
Okay, contrasted to 11 hours of jumping around and slashing and screaming. Little 2-line prayer at sunset. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and licked up the water in the trench. Okay, so fire comes down from heaven and nukes the whole thing. Doesn't just like start a little fire and burn the... Boom, disintegrates it. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. As one might expect upon seeing such a thing. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal, don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. Okay. So this is another one of those episodes where all of a sudden we have a ton of bloodshed. Well, we've talked in the past about how justice works in the Old Testament. Right? That it's about balancing things back out. What did Jezebel do? She went and killed all of God's prophets. Okay, so now God's judgment, how do we get this situation back to normal? Go and kill 450 of Jezebel's prophets. Right? Now things are even again. Right? Balance restored. Elijah said to Ahab, go eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. So he says to him, go get something to eat, it's going to rain. Hasn't rained for 3 years. Because Elijah said it wasn't going to. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, But Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. So he's up there prostrate and praying. "Go and look toward the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and looked. "There is nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain came on, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, or girding up his loins in the King James, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Okay, so he outruns a chariot there at the end too, to boot. But the important thing with this rain is to remember, Baal is a storm god. And the big great myth about Baal is this epic story about how he defeated the sea. Right? He defeated the sea and he brought rain to the people to grow crops. Okay? Well, so before the big fire episode, even before that, the fact that Yahweh can turn on and off the rain spigot should already show you that Baal isn't God. Right? That he isn't the one who has control of it. But now, the fact that this cloud comes up out of the sea, right? And Baal is always depicted as sort of riding on this storm cloud in their mythological drawings, right? Clearly, it's not Baal who's running what Baal is supposed to be running. Okay? So Ahab heads home, huge downpour. Elijah takes off running and beats him. So, what do you think is going to happen in chapter 19? Ahab is now borne witness to this too, right? He's seen this incredible sign. He's seen prophets of Baal all slaughtered. What's he going to do? He goes home to his wife. Chapter 19, verse 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely." See, she swears by her gods. "If by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." So he goes home and tells his wife all this stuff that happens, and her response is to send a message to Elijah saying, "I swear by my pagan gods that by tomorrow you're dead." That's her response. Okay? Does Ahab argue with her? Does Ahab try and talk her down? No. This is where the referring to a certain type of woman as a Jezebel comes from. Okay. And we're gonna see how she ends up here in a little bit. So verse 3, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." And he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. Okay. So despite this pretty big win, right? Or perhaps because he had this pretty big win and it seems like nothing has changed, he's still got everybody out to kill him. He's still having to hide out in the desert. Elijah prays and just says, "God, I'm done." I'm no better than any of these people. Go ahead and take my life. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Okay. So, God isn't too harsh with him. Right? He doesn't come down on him like a ton of bricks. Rather, he sends this angel to give him some food, to comfort him. Okay. To strengthen him for this journey. And now he's got him in this cave, and now he and God are going to have a talk about things. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." So he summarizes the problem. He says, look, I've been going out there, I've been doing everything you told me to, right? I've been trying to do everything right. They're out there sinning, destroying your altars and all this, killing your prophets. I'm the last guy left. Now they're all looking for me to kill me. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Okay. What does this sound like? Remember when Moses said, "Let me see"? He said, "Well, you can see when I pass by." Okay. So Elijah lays out his complaint. God says, Go stand outside the cave and wait. And I'm going to pass by and I'm going to reveal myself to you." Okay. So he goes outside. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. So this isn't just like a breeze, right? This is like a tornado, right? Comes through this massive crashing wind. Rocks break, rocks fall. Okay, this huge display, but that's not the Lord. The Lord's not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire. So there's an earthquake and things fall. There's a brush fire goes through the mountain pass, this huge fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. The King James Version has a still small voice.
Poetic, beautiful.
When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Okay? So what's going on here? Right? Where has Elijah been looking for God?
All
These big displays like Mount
big
Carmel.
displays, yeah.
Right? It's big displays. Is that where God is?
No.
Really? No. How often do we do this
Yeah, we want
in our lives? We want proof, we want miracles. Right? Right? We want healing now. Right? We want to see some big display. We want to see the icon start weeping. We want to see somebody levitate. We want to see, right? You hear these stories about the saints. We want to see the uncreated light coming from some monk's face, right? We want to see all this amazing stuff, right? And we say, "Oh God, if you could just let me see some of that stuff, then I wouldn't have any of these doubts, and I wouldn't have any of these, then I could really commit," right? That's sort of what Elijah is saying, and what does God say to him in response? That's not really how he works. Because what kind of God is he? Remember when he prayed on Mount Carmel? He's the kind of God who tries to draw his people's hearts back to him. He's not a storm God, right? Going around trashing other gods, battling dragons, right? But he's speaking to the hearts of his people. Okay. And so when we're looking for God, the answer isn't for us to go to God and say, "God, show me yourself," right? Do something, give me some sign, right? The answer is to look within ourselves and to try and hear, because it's this still small voice, it's this little whisper that we're usually too busy, too involved with other things to bother listening to sit and try and listen to that little voice and hear what he's trying to say to us. Hear what he's trying to say to us. And then listen to it and obey it. And that's where our connection to God is. Okay. So after this display, right, God says again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Now this is interesting. We've seen prophets be told to anoint kings before. But they were what? Kings of Israel.
Yeah.
He's anointing a king of the Syrians. So what's God saying with that?
Israel, you in deep trouble.
He's saying, I don't have just one nation.
Others.
If they don't want anything to do with me, that's fine. I'll go next door. I'll deal with the Syrians. I'll deal with the Phoenician widow. Right? I don't need them. They need me. So he says, go anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also, anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel. And anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel Meholah to succeed you as a prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael. And Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Okay? So he's saying, there's about to be a big change in leadership. Right? Between the Syrians and the new king of Israel who you're about to anoint. Ahab and Jezebel ain't going to be doing so well. Okay? And also anoint your successor. But he adds in verse 18, yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. So, point 2, you're not the last one left. You're not the last one left. May seem like it, but you're not. Now, another reason this is an important point is I talked a little bit, a couple Bible studies ago, about the role of prophets. How these prophets are sort of outsiders who God sends in because the religious institutions he set up have become corrupted. And the governmental institutions have become corrupted. And so, for someone to bring the word of the Lord to his people, they've got to come from outside. Right? And I gave examples from later in church history, which makes a lot of Orthodox people uncomfortable. Because you start talking about how corrupt the Byzantine Empire was for most of its history, for example, and people get really uncomfortable. Right? But all you have to do is, for example, read St. Simeon the New Theologian, who was a monk around 1000, right, in Constantinople, where he says, all of the bishops are so corrupt that you shouldn't go to them for confession anymore. You should go to monks even if they're not ordained. There's something shocking for you. Okay? But that's another example of the institutions had become so corrupt that God had to bring these outsiders, these monastics, who didn't answer to any of these official authorities, to come in and say, whoa, these are not the way God wants them to be. We need to get them back in line. And it happened all through Israel. We get an example with Tsar Ivan the Terrible. Right? Clearly things out of whack under Ivan the Terrible in Russia. And so this exists, but it's important to remember that when we say that, or for example, St. Athanasius, when he seemed to be the only one left who wasn't an Arian in the 4th century. When we say that there's just this group and all the institutions have become corrupt, right? We're not saying against what Jesus said, that the gates of hell prevailed against the church. Okay? Because at all those times, just like here with the 7,000 who never worship Baal, at all those times, there were always people who were serving and worshiping God.
Always a faithful remnant.
There always were. Regardless of whether bishop and patriarch became a political appointment, regardless of how corrupt any of those institutions became and how widespread it became, there were always people who were worshiping and serving God. Okay?
And those bishops were still doing the liturgy. They were still doing the Eucharist.
Well, yeah. But and God always sent those prophetic voices in to say, we need to get this fixed. This is wrong. Whether it was Athanasius coming and talking to the Arian bishops, or whether it was St. Simeon the New Theologian talking to the Byzantine bishops, whoever it was, God always sends those voices in. Okay? And Elijah is not just an example of that. Elijah is the sine qua non of that. He's the one who everybody else is going to be compared to, including, of course, famously St. John the Forerunner, St. John the Baptist. It's going to be compared to Elijah, because when he arrives on the scene, you've got Herod for a king, you've got the Sadducees for priests, who are political appointees in the temple of the Roman government. And things are a mess. So God sends an outsider in to announce his word. Okay. So verse 19, so Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Okay, so Elisha was not we picture a lot of biblical saints as being on the skinny side and but if you're plowing with a 12 oxen team and you're driving 12 pair, you're a pretty big, hardy guy. Right? So Elisha, pretty strapping young guy at this point at least. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied, what have I done to you? Right, so Elijah comes up and throws his cloak on him, basically saying, you're going to come with me and be my disciple. Elisha, to his credit, goes after, but then he says, wait, can I go back and say goodbye to my mom and pa? Right? And so Elijah kind of is going, what am I doing to this poor kid? Remember, this is what I was just saying, I'm the last one left and they're all trying to kill me. Right? So he's kind of saying, oh, what am I doing to you? Just go back to your parents. So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant. So Elisha is dead set on following him. So dead set on following him that he makes it so he can't really go back permanently. He gets rid of his livelihood. Right? He breaks up the wooden yokes and uses it to cook the oxen, and he gives the meat to the people of his village. Right? He just distributes it. I'm not going to need any of this stuff anymore, and he takes off to follow Elijah. Now this, of course, where do we see this paralleled is in the calling of the disciples. Right, when Jesus comes and says, follow me. And remember, there are those who make the excuses.
Right.
I need to bury my father, or I just did that, And he says,
I just bought some oxen.
yeah, I just bought some oxen.
I just got married.
And the disciples come to him and say, what about us who have given up families? They're called to give everything up and come follow. Okay. So this is when Jesus comes and calls them to be his disciples. This is where they get their understanding of what that means. Okay, this is why they don't think he just means, oh, hey, we're going on a trip. See who this guy is. We're going to the store. They know that it means he's calling them to follow him on a permanent basis, right? To become his disciple. Okay. So chapter 20, verse 1. Now Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mustered his entire army. That Hadad, the same one we were talking about a few minutes ago, who's one of the Baals, right? Ben-Hadad means son of Hadad. So the name of the current king of Syria is son of Hadad, the god who most of Israel is worshiping at this point. Accompanied by 32 kings with their horses and chariots, he went up and besieged Samaria and attacked it. Okay, so he decides, I'm going to go, Samaria is the capital. So essentially what he's doing is he's attempting to take over the whole northern kingdom of Israel. He sent messengers into the city to Ahab, king of Israel, saying, "This is what Ben-Hadad says, your silver and gold are mine, and the best of your wives and children are mine." Okay. So, not only am I taking all your money, but I'm going to pick through your wives and your kids, and the ones I like, I'm going to take. Okay. So how do you think Ahab's going to answer him? Verse 4. Yeah. I know it has him as son of Hadad in there instead of Ben-Hadad.
This is all about Ahab and Naboth and a vineyard.
Okay.
Gardens,
Let me see.
herbs, and
Okay. Yeah, this chapter's
blah, blah.
this chapter's not the Septuagint. That's going to be chapter 21, and so we'll get to that in a second. So if you're using the Orthodox Study Bible,
Stop listening.
just
Stop reading. Stop reading and listening.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I guess it cuts out what after Ben-Hadad saying, there's something in there about Ben-Hadad, isn't there at the beginning of the chapter? Oh, no, okay.
It ends up after Elisha's given up all of his stuff.
Okay.
Rose and follows Elijah, and that's it. That's
Okay.
the end of 19.
Well, we'll catch back up here in a minute then. Okay.
The whole chapter is this end.
This part about Ben-Hadad attacking.
It's not in the Orthodox
It's not in the Orthodox study. It's not in the Septuagint.
Get yourself a King James.
Well, the Septuagint doesn't have that chapter.
Okay, so he's laying siege to Samaria. He throws down his demands. Verse 4, the king of Israel answered, "Just as you say, my lord the king, I and all I have are yours." So not only does Ahab not stand up to his wife, he apparently doesn't stand up to anybody. Okay. Messengers came again and said, "This is what Ben-Hadad says, I sent to demand your silver and gold, your wives and your children. But about this time tomorrow I am going to send my officials to search your palace and the houses of your officials. They will seize everything you value and carry it away." So it's almost sort of disbelief. It's like, wait, I sent you a message saying I was taking all your stuff, and you seem to just sort of say, okay. Well, I'm actually going to send people around to get it tomorrow. So he says, I'm actually sending the people to take it. So verse 7, the king of Israel summoned all the elders of the land and said to them, "See how this man is looking for trouble? When he sent for my wives and my children, my silver and my gold, I did not refuse him." The elders of the people all answered, "Don't listen to him or agree to his demands." So he says, boy, this guy's being really rotten. When he just wanted my wives and my children and all my money, I said, go ahead and take it. But now he's going to come through and really scour the place. That's no good. Right? So the elders say, well, I wouldn't put up with that either. Okay. So he replied to Ben-Hadad's messengers, "Tell my lord the king, your servant will do all you demanded the first time, but this demand I cannot meet." They left and took the answer back to Ben-Hadad. Then Ben-Hadad sent another message to Ahab. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely." So he starts out exactly the way Jezebel started with her statement that she was going to kill Elijah. "If enough dust remains in Samaria to give each of my men a handful." The king of Israel answered, "Tell him, one who puts on his armor should not boast like one who takes it off." So there's smack talk going back and forth now, right? So he says, I'm not going to leave a handful of dust left where you are. And he's saying, basically, it's easy to talk before a battle. It's harder to talk after the battle. Right? So they're going back and forth. Ben-Hadad heard this message while he and the kings were drinking in their tents, and he ordered his men, prepare to attack. So they prepared to attack the city. Meanwhile, a prophet came to Ahab, king of Israel, and announced, "This is what the Lord says. Do you see this vast army? I will give it into your hand today, and then you will know that I am the Lord." Now notice the "I am the Lord." Right? So in the Hebrew, it's sort of Yahweh is Yahweh. Right? You're going to know that I exist when these 33 kings who just lined up to attack you beat. Okay. "But who will do this?" asked Ahab. The prophet replied, "This is what the Lord says, the young officers of the provincial commanders will do it." Ahab doesn't say, all right, I'm going to go out and beat them. He says, who's going to beat them? Right? So the prophet, well, some of your junior officers will take care of it, okay? Don't worry about it. And who will start the battle, he asked.
You.
The prophet answered, you will. So Ahab summoned the young officers of the provincial commanders, 232 men. Then he assembled the rest of the Israelites, 7,000 in all. They set out at noon while Ben-Hadad and the 32 kings allied with him were in their tents getting drunk. So they're still drinking, celebrating, getting ready for the battle. And here comes the sneak attack. The young officers of the provincial commanders went out first. Now Ben-Hadad had dispatched scouts who reported men are advancing from Samaria. He said, if they have come out for peace, take them alive. If they have come out for war, take them alive. Okay? So he's saying either way, take them prisoner. Right? Probably intending to make an example out of them, not actually intending to negotiate. The young officers of the provincial commanders marched out of the city with the army behind them, and each one struck down his opponent. At that the Arameans fled, with the Israelites in pursuit, but Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, escaped on horseback with some of his horsemen. The king of Israel advanced and overpowered the horses and chariots and inflicted heavy losses on the Arameans. Afterward the prophet came to the king of Israel and said, strengthen your position and see what must be done, because next spring the king of Aram will attack you again. Meanwhile, the officials of the king of Aram advised him, their gods are gods of the hills. Well, what's the problem with this? Remember again, what was the whole purpose of Israel according to the law of Deuteronomy? They were supposed to worship Yahweh, and they were supposed to be this example for all the other nations of the world. So all the other nations of the world would come and worship Yahweh also. Okay, well, what impression have they given to their neighbors, the Syrians?
We're number one.
They worship hill gods. Hills, meaning the high places. Right? All these high places with the altars to Baal. Their gods are gods of the hills. That is why they are too strong for us. But if we fight them on the plains, surely we will be stronger than they. Right? This is some pagan logic there. Right? We're fighting them in the hills, and they worship hill gods. See, we got to go fight them on the flatland. Then their gods won't help them. Do this, remove all the kings from their commands and replace them with other officers. You must also raise an army like the one you lost, horse for horse and chariot for chariot, so we could fight Israel on the plains. Then surely we will be stronger than they. He agreed with them and acted accordingly. The next spring Ben-Hadad mustered the Arameans and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. When the Israelites were also mustered and given provisions, they marched out to meet them. The Israelites camped opposite them like two small flocks of goats, while the Arameans covered the countryside. The man of God came up and told the king of Israel, this is what the Lord says. Because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and not a God of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am the Lord. So why does the prophet say they're going to win this one?
God is above everything.
Not because of King Ahab. Right? It's because God wants to correct the Syrians in their view of him. Right? God wants the Syrians to know that he's not just a hill god. Right? He wants the Syrians to know that he's the God of everything.
Is that why he anointed them instead of Ahab?
Well, he's concerned about correcting their misapprehension, not with preserving Ahab as king. Right? For 7 days they camped opposite each other, and on the seventh day the battle was joined. The Israelites inflicted 100,000 casualties on the Aramean foot soldiers in one day. The rest of them escaped to the city of Aphek, where the wall collapsed on 27,000 of them. And Ben-Hadad fled to the city and hid in an inner room. His officials said to him, look, we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful. Let us go to the king of Israel with sackcloth around our waists and ropes around our heads. Perhaps he will spare your life. Okay, so he says, hey, I've heard they're merciful if you surrender. Okay, so take off all your kingly robes and everything. All right, put on sackcloth, dumpy robes, tie a rope around your head, look like a peasant. Go and surrender, and maybe they'll at least let you live. Wearing sackcloth around their waists and ropes around their heads, they went to the king of Israel and said, your servant Ben-Hadad says, please let me live. The king answered, is he still alive? He is my brother. The men took this as a good sign and were quick to pick up his word. "Yes, your brother Ben-Hadad," they said. "Go and get him," the king said. When Ben-Hadad came out, Ahab had him come up into his chariot. "I will return the cities my father took from your father," Ben-Hadad offered. "You may set up your own market areas in Damascus as my father did in Samaria." Okay, so he says, remember the deal your dad and my dad had? Since you're being so nice to me, right? We'll make another deal. You can come and we'll set up a trade deal for your exports in Damascus. It'll be great. Ahab said, "On the basis of a treaty, I will set you free." So he made a treaty with him and let him go. By the word of the Lord, one of the sons of the prophets said to his companion, "Strike me with your weapon." But the man refused. So the prophet said, "Because you have not obeyed the Lord, as soon as you leave me, a lion will kill you." And after the man went away, a lion found him and killed him. We're in another, there was a transition there. Okay, so Ahab spares Ben-Hadad. Okay, meanwhile, we have some bizarre prophecy going on. Okay, and this actually is in the Septuagint. I think it's later. So, but I'm not sure the verse reference. But when we get to it again, you'll recognize it. It's in a different order, though. But so we're now having, prophets in addition to coming and giving pronouncements, we're also going to see they do prophetic actions, and sometimes those prophetic actions are weird. Okay? Ezekiel, for example, is going to run around naked for a while. At another point, Ezekiel is going to walk around in stocks. He's going to walk around. So sometimes the prophets are going to sort of do things that are supposed to be representative of something else. Okay. So this prophet, right, says to another one of the prophets, he says, "Hit me," basically. Right? Hit me. The guy says, "I'm not going to hit you." Right? And he says, "Well, since you refuse, the Lord wants you to hit me, and since you refuse to do it, you're going to get eaten by a lion." Kind of drastic. But remember, the prophets are the ones who are called upon to be the example of obedience now. Right? Since everyone else has gone off the rails, the prophets are the ones now who are supposed to be the examples. So this first one says, "I'm not going to." Says, "Strike me with your weapon." The man refused. The prophet said, "Because you have not obeyed the Lord, as soon as you leave me, a lion will kill you." And after the man went away, a lion found him and killed him. The prophet found another man and said, "Strike me, please." So the man struck him and wounded him. Then the prophet went and stood by the road waiting for the king. He disguised himself with his headband down over his eyes. So he takes basically like it's a bandage over his eyes. So the prophet gets somebody to hit him, sets up his headband like a bandage. He goes and he waits on the side of the road for the king. As the king passed by, the prophet called out to him, "Your servant went into the thick of the battle, and someone came to me with a captive and said, 'Guard this man. If he is missing, it will be your life for his life, or you must pay a talent of silver.' While your servant was busy here and there, the man disappeared. 'That is your sentence,' the king of Israel said. 'You have pronounced it yourself.' Then the prophet quickly removed the headband from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized him as one of the prophets. He said to the king, 'This is what the Lord says. You have set free a man I had determined should die. Therefore it is your life for his, your people for his people.' And then sullen and angry, or pouting, the king of Israel went to his palace in Samaria." Okay, so this was an object lesson, right? He came and he poses as one of the soldiers and says, "Somebody charged me to take care of this other person in the battle, saying keep an eye on them, and if something happens to them, it's your life." Right? "And I lost track of them." So the king says, "Well, then you're going to have to die." So he takes off the disguise, right, and says, "Well, you let live someone who God determined to die, so now it's going to be your life. Traded for his." Because God, remember, had given Ben-Hadad over to be judged, but he offered Ahab a trade agreement, and Ahab said, "Oh, well." there's money to be had on exports, then of course I can let you live. Okay. Okay, so now we're at chapter 20 in the Orthodox Study Bible, or 21 if you're not in the Orthodox Study Bible.
Why was the chapter going?
Well, as I said, well, some of this is going to appear. I think it's going to be flipped. I think it's going to be after this. Some of this is going to be the Septuagint. Like I said, these were collected, right? These were originally individual pieces and stories that were all compiled and edited together. And so that was done, and that was done over a period of time. It wasn't just done at one time. So basically what you have is you have two slightly different collections, or they're in different order. And this, I'll have a plan by the time we.
Familiar.
Yeah.
I've read this.
I'll have a plan for this when we get to the book of Jeremiah. But the book of Jeremiah in the Septuagint is about 1/3 the size and in a completely different order than Jeremiah in like the King James. And they used to think that one was older or one was a bad translation or one was a bad copy. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found Hebrew copies of both versions right next to each other in the same. So there were just two different versions of Jeremiah floating around. Two different collections of his prophecies.
I was just going to say, I think in the Orthodox study Bible, what you just went over was 21.
It's 21. It's 20 and 21 are flipped.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, because I knew at least some of the episode with Ben Hadad was in there. Just later, is chapter 21 talk about Ben Hadad and invading,
Yeah.
or that they translate it? They have the son of Hadad in the.
I didn't realize until it got to the end of it. So
Yeah. So it looks like it's flipped.
Because, it sounded funny.
Okay. So, but yeah, that's how that happened. That's how that happened, and that's why. As only a brief excursus, that's why fundamentalist versions of Protestantism don't work. Because if you're going to say Jeremiah is the direct dictated word of God, as it is, and you have to take every word of it literally, then we have to ask, okay, well, which version of Jeremiah? And how do we know? And literally for who? Literally for us reading it in English, or literally for them reading it in Hebrew at the time? All kinds of problems ensue. If you take that point of view, we have to. Our view of the scriptures has to accommodate the actual scriptures. And what we've been given isn't like the Quran is supposed to be, just falling out of heaven, complete, all perfect. We've been given a whole bunch of different books, in some cases multiple versions of different books, handed down for, in the case of the Old Testament, thousands of years. In different collections and variants. And weird things have crept in, like the thing I mentioned last time about take this, drink quickly in the middle of Isaiah, that some scribe accidentally worked in, and little things like that. And so, whatever our view of the scriptures is going to be, it has to accommodate the actual scriptures that we have. So, and especially with the Old Testament, it becomes problematic.
Okay. If it's problematic, then how does this fit in with the infallibility of the Bible?
Well,
What was the question, Father?
his question was about the infallibility of the Bible. Okay, and that's not a term that's commonly used in Orthodoxy. Right? No, that's fine. That's fine. Because Orthodoxy would talk about the infallibility of the church, which is related to the infallibility of the Holy Spirit. That the Holy Spirit is active in the church. and that therefore, as the church reads and interprets the scriptures, right? The church's collective interpretation, not at any given point, but through the whole history of the church, right? That is infallible in the sense that that can be relied upon to be correct. Okay? When in Protestant circles, the infallibility of the scriptures is usually referring to the infallibility of my reading of the scriptures, my personal reading of the scriptures. And from an Orthodox perspective, well, just even from a secular perspective, right? There's
from a secular
28,000 different denominations in this country, all claiming they're just reading the Bible and what it says. You know, and are all arriving at totally different conclusions from just taking the Bible and what it says. Right? So there has to be some means of saying, am I reading this correctly? You know, am I taking this in the right way? And the way the Orthodox Church sees that is that we know that the Holy Spirit is living in the church and guiding the church. Christ and the Holy Spirit will guide us into all truth. Okay? So if I read a passage and I think it's saying one thing, and then I go and look at the church fathers, and look at the way bishops are interpreting it today, and look at the way it's been read for the last 2,000 years of Christian history, and they disagree with me, then I'm wrong. I'm reading it wrong.
Well, can I...
And they're reading it correctly.
As a secular type thing?
Sure.
Look, if it takes the church 400 years to have a meeting, like that has taught me never order a pizza from the church. That's the first thing I've learned. So, if I have a question, okay, the question answered by the church fathers, priest, preacher, okay, has to come from that context. And I have seen over the years, church history, even Christian, change its position from time to time. I mean,
I would argue with that in terms of the Orthodox Church.
Huh?
I would argue with that in terms of the Orthodox Church. Now again, I'm giving you the Orthodox viewpoint of it.
Okay.
From a Roman Catholic perspective, they believe in the development of doctrine.
Yeah.
They believe that the Holy Spirit is gradually revealing all truth, and that the Holy Spirit leads into new truth and new understanding, which is their explanation for how there could be quote-unquote changes or development.
I don't think they do. I'm not Roman Catholic, but I went to Wheeling Jesuit, and I had to take a course in religion, and they talked about, and I forgot the name of it. It was Teilhard Chardin, French guy. But it was a evolutionary type thing where man almost arrives and God is one step in front of it.
And so there's this progress idea
and I think
that we don't have. That we don't have. The Orthodox Church, we believe faith once for all delivered to the saints. So the faith that Saints Peter and Paul held is the same one that we want to be holding today. So there shouldn't be any change. And we would say there isn't. At least in our...
Well, I'm just saying, if we're led by the Holy Spirit, okay, then individually we have a different thing. I don't think I should go into this dialogue because I'm taking it from the class.
Okay. But it's an individual versus collective.
Collective, yes, thank you.
Idea. Okay. But so at any rate, all that from explaining the two chapters getting flipped. So these are collections. So that's how different editors edited those two episodes together differently. Okay. So chapter 21 or chapter 20, if you're in the Orthodox Study Bible. Sometime later there was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. See, you can see how these are sort of separate stories that are being... The vineyard was in Jezreel, close to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab said to Naboth, "Let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard, or if you prefer, I will pay you whatever it is worth." Okay. Now, from a secular perspective, Ahab here is being really nice. Because Ahab's the king. He could just take it if he wanted to. From a secular perspective. Okay, he's saying, hey, you've got this nice vineyard on your property adjoining my property. I'll trade it to you for another vineyard somewhere else, or if you want, I'll just buy it from you for what it's worth. Verse 3, but Naboth replied, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. So Naboth not only is someone who's still worshiping Yahweh, but he's also someone who knows the law, the Torah, right? He knows that each family had an inheritance, remember? And they were supposed to keep it. They weren't supposed to get rid of it. And even if they did for some reason get rid of it, the year of Jubilee, it was supposed to come back to them. Right? So Naboth says, I can't do that. This is my inheritance for my family and from God. Right? God gave this land to my family. I can't buy and sell it. Okay. So here's one of the 7,000 that God was talking about. Verse 4, so Ahab went home sullen and angry, pouting again. Because Naboth the Jezreelite had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. He lay on his bed sulking and refused to eat. Okay. So we're getting a picture of Ahab's personality. Okay. His dad may have been this great, strong king. And his wife seems pretty tough. But him not so much. Him not so much. So he's refusing to eat and laying around in bed and pouting. His wife Jezebel came in and asked him, why are you so sullen? Why won't you eat? He answered her, because I said to Naboth the Jezreelite, sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard in its place. But he said, I will not give you my vineyard. Naboth won't give me his vineyard, honey. Jezebel, his wife, said, is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So she says, you're supposed to be the king. Come on. Get out of bed. Go eat something. I'll go take care of this Naboth guy. All right, so he's letting his woman do his fighting for him. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name, placed his seal on them, and sent them to the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city with him. In those letters she wrote, proclaim a day of fasting and seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people, but seat 2 scoundrels opposite him, and have them testify that he has cursed both God and the king, then take him out and stone him to death. Okay? So she goes, forges her husband's name, uses a seal on the letters and says, go get 2 deadbeats and bribe them to lie and say that Naboth cursed God and the king so he can be put to death. So the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city did as Jezebel directed in the letters she had written to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth in a prominent place among the people. Then 2 scoundrels came and sat opposite him and brought charges against Naboth before the people, saying, Naboth has cursed both God and the king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned to death, she said to Ahab, get up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite that he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive but dead. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he got up and went down to take possession of Naboth's vineyard. So is he shocked?
No.
Is he horrified? No. Thanks, honey. I'm going to go get my vineyard. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who rules in Samaria. He is now in Naboth's vineyard, where he has gone to take possession of it. Say to him, this is what the Lord says. Have you not murdered a man and seized his property? Then say to him, this is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours. Okay, so again, this is one of those curses where not only are you going to die, but your body's going to lay out there and nobody's going to bury you. Dogs are going to eat it. Right, this is a curse. Ahab said to Elijah, so you have found me, my enemy. My nemesis. Now what's interesting Think for a second. Is Elijah really Ahab's enemy?
No.
If anybody's Ahab's enemy, it's Jezebel. Right? If anybody's trying to destroy him, it's his wife. Okay? Elijah's trying to get him to turn and repent. Okay? But we, remember what Jesus said to the Pharisees? Don't sit around and say, if we had been alive in the time of the prophets, we wouldn't have stoned them to death. We would have. See, it's easy for us to say that. But how much do you like the people who God brings into your life who point out your flaws?
You don't.
When God brings somebody into your life who says to you, hey, you know all that blank you're doing on the weekend? Should you really be doing that as a Christian? How do you look at that person? How do you respond to that person? Is it, gee, thanks, pal, for coming and trying to... Or is it like Ahab? Oh, here comes my enemy. Right? A lot of times the people who God sends to prophesy to us, we treat like our enemies. Our counterexample, of course, was David with Nathan the prophet. Nathan shows up to convict him about Bathsheba. Does he say, get out of here, my enemy? Right? No. He repents. So we need to think about that a little. We tend to respond the same way. When God sends someone into our life to point those things out, they're doing us a favor. That's it's kind of hidden in the King James English, but in the Psalm we hear chanted every Vespers. Right? It's let a just man rebuke me in mercy. Right? So you're asking God to send righteous people to straighten you out. Right? To come and rebuke you, to come and say, you shouldn't be doing that. Right? And the next verse is, but let not the oil of the sinner anoint my head. Right? We much prefer having the sinner come and anoint our head and tell us how great we are and how wonderful we are and what great people we are, just the way we are. Right? We like them a lot more than we like the righteous people who come up and try and straighten us out. So something to think about before we condemn Ahab too quickly here in terms of knowing who his friends are. So I have found you, he answered. Elijah answers. Because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. That you have sold yourself isn't you have sold yourself as a slave. It's more like you have prostituted yourself. Do evil in the eyes of the Lord. I'm going to bring disaster on you. I will consume your descendants and cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make your house like that of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and that of Baasha, son of Ahijah. Remember, those were the first two dynasties in Israel that got wiped out after a very short time. He said, your house is going to be just like their household, because you have provoked me to anger and have caused Israel to sin. Notice the second part. What's worse than all the stuff that Ahab has done?
He's provoked these people to sin.
The stuff that he's led God's people to do. We've seen that a couple times now. You want to talk about what makes God angry, right? Sin makes God angry. Leading other people to sin makes God really angry. I remember when Jesus said it'd be better to have a millstone tied around your neck and be thrown into the sea than to lead one of these little ones astray. Yeah, that's why St. Paul says not many of you should want to be teachers. Because if you're going to go around teaching others, you're going to be held extra accountable for what, not only for what you do, but for what you teach them to do and how you teach them to live. And also concerning Jezebel, the Lord says, dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Dogs will eat those belonging to Ahab who die in the city, and the birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. There was never a man like Ahab who sold himself to, again, prostituted himself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, urged on by Jezebel his wife. He behaved in the vilest manner by going after idols like the Amorites the Lord drove out before Israel. Okay, so he's not only as bad as the other kings before him, he's as bad as the Canaanites who God came in and wiped out to give the land to. That's how bad not just Ahab but Israel has become. When Ahab heard these words, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and fasted. He lay in sackcloth and went around meekly. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, "Have you noticed how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring this disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the days of his son." So Ahab, who we've just been told, there's never been a guy like that, right? Who's held up as the prime example of someone who's done evil in the eyes of the Lord. Even for him, when he repents, he gets mercy. Even him, if he's willing to repent, God will be merciful to him. There's still going to be consequences for his actions. Again, the consequence, we talked about this with David, the consequences don't go away. The consequences are still there. But there's mercy. I think we're going to press on a little. Okay, so chapter 22, if you're in something other than the Orthodox Study Bible, I think we're going to have to, maybe, is it chapter 22 now again? How's chapter 22 start in the Orthodox Study Bible?
3 years passed without war.
Yeah, okay, so we're back where, so it was chapters 20 and 21 that were flipped. Okay, so now we're all on the same page with chapter 22. For 3 years there was no war between Aram and Israel. This is after the incident with Ben-Hadad. But in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went down to see the king of Israel. The king of Israel had said to his officials, "Don't you know that Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us? And yet we are doing nothing to retake it from the king of Aram." Okay? So he says, there's this city here on our quote-unquote border that technically belongs to us, but the Syrians are occupying it. And we haven't been doing anything to try and take it back. Verse 4, so he asked Jehoshaphat, so he asked the king of Judah, "Will you go with me to fight against Ramoth-Gilead?" So he's trying to make an alliance now. Ahab with king of Israel, Judah say, "Let's get together, let's go attack Ramoth-Gilead." And you can see where that is. On the map, it's all the way to the east. So it's kind of a remote town, which explains why they haven't been real quick to try and go after it. But the Syrians have it right now. Okay. Jehoshaphat replied to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." But Jehoshaphat also said to the king of Israel, "First seek the counsel of the Lord." Now, Jehoshaphat, that Jeho at the beginning is Yahoo, it's Yahweh. And that Shaphat is from Shaphat, which means to judge. So his name is the Lord Judges. Which is going to be kind of ironic for what's about to happen with Ahab. Okay. And so he's the king of Judah, where the temple is. He's Asa, who was the good king. The one good king we heard about. His son. So he's still worshiping Yahweh. Okay, so King Ahab says to him, "Hey, let's team up and go take this city back." He says, "Sure, let's do it. But hey, let's ask Yahweh first what to do." So the king of Israel brought together the prophets, about 400 men, and asked them, "Shall I go to war against Ramoth-Gilead, or shall I refrain?" "Go," they answered, "for the Lord will give it into the king's hand." But Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there not a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of?" Now notice the subtlety there. He says, "Let's ask Yahweh what we should do." So Ahab calls together all his prophets. Says, "Should I go to war?" And they'll say, "Yeah, king, go to war. Yahweh will give it to you." Okay, but none of them are actually prophets of Yahweh.
Oh, okay.
So Jehoshaphat says, "Isn't there a prophet of Yahweh we can ask?" Maybe not knowing that Jezebel's been killing them off. I don't know. Yeah. The king of Israel answered Jehoshaphat, "There is still one man through whom we can inquire of the Lord, but I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, but always bad." Okay. Well, there's this one guy But I don't like him because every time I ask him what's going to happen, he tells me bad things are going to happen to me. So again, what's his standard of judgment? Not the truth, right? What he wants to hear. He never tells me what I want to hear. Like these other 400 who I just called here who said, oh yeah, you'll win, go to war. Yeah. It says, he is Micaiah, son of Imlah. The king should not say that, Jehoshaphat replied. So Jehoshaphat says, oh, come on. Right? Shouldn't talk that way. He's the prophet of the Lord. So the king of Israel called one of his officials and said, bring Micaiah, son of Imlah, at once. Dressed in their royal robes, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were sitting on their thrones at the threshing floor by the entrance of the gate of Samaria, with all the prophets prophesying before them. Now Zedekiah, son of Kenana, had made iron horns, and he declared, this is what the Lord says, with these you will gore the Arameans until they are destroyed. Okay, so this guy shows up, and again, this is one of those actions. He's got these iron horns. And he comes up and he says, these iron horns are like a bull's horns, you're going to gore them. Right? you're going to stick it to them. You're going to defeat those Syrians. Okay. And all the other prophets were prophesying the same thing. Attack Ramoth Gilead and be victorious, they said, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, look, as one man, the other prophets are predicting success for the king. Let your word agree with theirs and speak favorably. Right? So they go together, they're like, come on, look, all these other prophets are all telling him he's going to win. Just go tell him he's going to win. You know? Just tell him what he wants to hear. But Micaiah says, as surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me. So Micaiah says, I'm the real deal. Whatever Yahweh says to me, that's what I'm going to say to him. When he arrived, the king asked him, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? Attack and be victorious, he answered, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. The king said to him, how many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? So Ahab is suspicious. Why? Because he's for the first time ever telling him what he wants to hear. It's like,
don't believe.
Okay, you swear that that's the...
I kind of understand Ahab. Usually when I hear good news, I'm a little bit surprised.
Yeah. So the king said to him, how many times must I swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? Then Micaiah answered, I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, these people have no master. Let each one go home in peace. Right? So when he tells them to swear, he says, I saw all the people of Israel all scattered. They had no shepherd. They had no leader. They didn't have a king. Right? I.e., you're going to die. Right? So how does Ahab respond in verse 18? The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad? See, what did I tell you? Look, you made me go and get this guy. Micaiah continued, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing around him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who will lure Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there? One suggested this and another that. Finally a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord and said, I will lure him. By what means, the Lord asked. I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets, he said. You will succeed in luring him, said the Lord. Go and do it. So now the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you. Okay? So he's saying, look, you got these 400 guys telling you what you want to hear, and they're all lying. Right? Every single one of them. And it's to bring about the judgment, remember, because Elijah already declared the judgment on Ahab is coming from God. That he's going to die. Then Zedekiah, son of Kenana, went up and slapped Micaiah in the face. So the guy who made the horns, right, who was so pro Ahab, he goes over and slaps Micaiah. Which way did the Spirit from the Lord go when he went from me to speak to you? He asked. Micaiah replied, you will find out on the day you go to hide in an inner room. Okay, so he's trying to put him on the spot. He said, oh yeah, you're telling the truth? Well, then which way did the Spirit go when he left me to come talk to you? Because he was talking to me earlier. Right? And Micaiah responds somewhat cagily. He says, you'll find out. Well, the day comes when you're hiding in an inner room. So we'll see what that means here later. The king of Israel then ordered, take Micaiah and send him back to Ammon, the ruler of the city, and to Joash the king's son, and say, this is what the king says, put this fellow in prison and give him nothing but bread and water until I return safely. So apparently Ahab, unconvinced by the minority report from this one prophet, says, go lock him up in jail, put him on bread and water until I come back safely from this battle, and then I'll show him
And if I don't come back,
who's a real prophet. Then I'll show him who's the real prophet. Micaiah declared, if you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me. And he added, mark my words, all you people. Right? So he said, everybody here, if he comes back safely, then I'm a liar. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will enter the battle in disguise, but you wear your royal robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. Now this is twofold. Number one, he just painted a big target on Jehoshaphat, right? By having him go out in his royal robe. But number two, this shows that at least in the back of his head somewhere, Ahab has this nagging thing.
Yep.
that this battle may not go so well for him. Now the king of Aram had ordered his 32 chariot commanders, do not fight with anyone small or great except the king of Israel. When the chariot commanders saw Jehoshaphat, they thought, surely this is the king of Israel. Right? So he said, don't get lured off by any of their military commanders. You go straight for their king and take him out. So they see Jehoshaphat in his royal robes. They say, that must be him. Right? So they go after him. They thought, surely this is the king of Israel, so they turned to attack him. But when Jehoshaphat cried out, the chariot commander saw that he was not the king of Israel and stopped pursuing him. But someone drew his bow at random and hit the king of Israel between the sections of his armor. Okay, so in the midst of the battle, right, one of the Syrian archers, is just shooting arrows into the enemy forces. And one of those arrows goes into Ahab. Between the pieces of his armor. The king told his chariot driver, wheel around and get me out of the fighting, I've been wounded. All day long the battle raged, and the king was propped up in his chariot facing the Arameans. The blood from his wound ran onto the floor of the chariot, and that evening he died. As the sun was setting, a cry spread through the army, every man to his town, everyone to his land. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried him there. They washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria where the prostitutes bathed, and the dogs licked up his blood as the word of the Lord had declared. As for the other events of Ahab's reign, including all he did, the palace he built and inlaid with ivory, and the cities he fortified, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Ahab rested with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son succeeded him as king. Okay. As for all the other stuff he did, all his actual worldly accomplishments, you can read about that in the history books. You've just read what God has to say about him. Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, became king of Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 25 years. His mother's name was Azubah, daughter of Shilhi. Now remember, why is his mother's name important? It's going back to what you talked about last time. In Judah, you didn't have a queen per se who was the wife of the king. The king's mother, whichever of the wives of the previous king that had been, the king's mother reigned alongside him as the queen mother. Remember, we saw that starting with Solomon when he set up the throne for Bathsheba. And we've seen each of the kings of Judah, their mother holding this office. And we talked about last time how going forward, when you get to the New Testament, if Jesus is the Messiah, if he's the king who sits on David's throne, then logically his mother
It's Queen Mo.
is the Queen Mother, which is where that came from in Christianity. Contra modern objections that say that that was something from paganism that they did to Mary, or blah, 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 blah. That comes straight out of the Old Testament. All right, it's in keeping with him being the king and the descendant of David. In everything he walked in the ways of his father Asa and did not stray from them. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. The high places, however, were not removed, and the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Jehoshaphat was also at peace with the king of Israel. As for the other events of Jehoshaphat's reign, the things he achieved in his military exploits, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? He rid the land of the rest of the male shrine prostitutes who remained there even after the reign of his father Asa. There was then no king in Edom, a deputy ruled. Now Jehoshaphat built a fleet of trading ships to go to Ophir for gold, but they never set sail. They were wrecked at Ezion-Geber. At that time Ahaziah, son of Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my men sail with your men," but Jehoshaphat refused. Then Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David his father, and Jehoram his son succeeded him. Ahaziah, son of Ahab, became king of Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel 2 years. 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord because he walked in the ways of his father and mother, and in the ways of Jeroboam son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. He served and worshipped Baal and provoked the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger, just as his father had done. That's the end of Third Kingdoms or First Kings. Okay, and we'll pick up next time at the beginning of Second Kings. We're going to go back now to Elijah and Elisha and follow them. Because again, we're still in a situation where the formal institutions are still all corrupt. And so who's worshiping the Lord? Who is God working with and working through? He's working through his prophets. So we're following that. Even though the title of the book is Kings or Kingdoms, we're actually following prophets. And so 2 Kings will take us through the rest of the history of the two divided kingdoms. And then we'll have a few more historical books where we get the rest of the Old Testament history, and then we'll start reading the prophets themselves. So thank you everybody for coming, and Lord willing, see you next week.
Thank you.